part 3 of chapter 10, looking at endotoxins and exotoxins. All right, toxins are a major virulence factor. How can a bacterium be pathogenic, cause disease, cause destruction? And endotoxins and exotoxins are a key player there. All right, so endotoxin itself is a lipid. All right, it's found in the cell wall. All right, the cell wall of gram-negative bacteria. So if you have an issue with endotoxin, then you have an infection with a gram-negative organism. All right, that's one of the hallmark pieces of microbiology, is to know that endotoxin comes from gram-negative bacteria. It is a lipid in the gram-negative. All right, another hallmark of endotoxin is that it causes fever. So sometimes you're going to have a bacterial infection and you may or may not run a fever. All right, sometimes the fever is just the natural response of your body to try to fight that infection, but sometimes it's actually the endotoxin. If you have a gram-negative bacteria infection, it is the endotoxin that actually causes the body to alter the body temperature. All right, so can it be neutralized in the patient? No. Once you have endotoxin in your system just has to work through it. Try to clear it out, break it down, and get rid of it. All right, and then toxicity level, it's low. So it has a high LD50, meaning you have to have a high dose in order for it to be lethal. So it's lower in toxicity because you need a higher amount. Now, flip over or switch over to exotoxins. Exotoxins are proteins, and these are going to be produced by both gram-negative and gram-positive, and they are released, all right, they exit that cell. So they're released from actively growing cells here. All right, so the bacterium synthesizes the exotoxin, the protein inside of it, and then it releases it out into the environment. And the environment could be you, all right, the host. All right, can exotoxins serve as vaccine options? Sometimes. And do exotoxins cause fever? By definition, no. All right, but some exotoxins are what are called superantigens, and the superantigens actually induce the immune response to secrete different cytokines and interleukins that do cause fever. So sometimes exotoxins will cause fever, but that is through actually the immune response to the fever. All right, and can exotoxins be neutralized? Yes, some of them. So because they are proteins, all right, if you were to be exposed to a particular exotoxin and you are in a grave situation, all right, your health is declining because of this exotoxin, you can actually go to the doctor, go to the emergency room, the hospital, and in some cases, you can be given an antitoxin, right? An antibody that will neutralize the toxin, and then it's not toxic anymore. All right, so toxicity level. Exotoxins by nature are highly toxic. All right, they have a low lethal dose, LD50, meaning you don't have to get a lot in order for it to be lethal, in order for it to be deadly. All right, so then we didn't look at this box here in terms of the endotoxin being part of the gram-negative cell, and it is released into the system when the bacteria divides or dies, because it's right here. All right, endotoxins are mainly released when gram-negative bacteria cells die. So this is the lipid molecule that is on the surface of a gram-negative bacterium. All right, the LPS molecule lipopolysaccharide is the endotoxin. All right, and there is a portion of this LPS that is actually the endotoxin, all right, the lipid A. So there's, different parts of this LPS molecule, but the lipid A component, which is on the outer edge of the long branch here, that is the endotoxin, and that's actually what is a problem. All right, so here you have this gram-negative bacterium cell. It is starting to break up. The cell wall is degraded, so you've got these holes in it. And as that cell starts to degrade, all right, the endotoxin, all right, the LPS molecule also starts to degrade, and parts of that are released. And endotoxin, or LPS, all right, it's also part of the gram-negative bacterium. So once you get a gram-negative bacterium in you, your immune system can start fighting off that endotoxin, right, that LPS. And so you may start to run a fever, right, because you have endotoxin in you, and it's where it's not supposed to be. But then once the cell dies, it will be released at higher numbers. And when this cell, this live cell here, actually divides, right, to make two new cells. Right? In that binary fission process and the cell wall pinching off in the middle here, remember, to get two separate cells, right, you will also have some release of endotoxin as well. So endotoxin is released at two different points, right, either through division of that gram-negative cell or death that gram-negative cell. All right, so the immune system or antibiotics kill the gram-negative bacterium, and that will cause increased in circulating endotoxins. All right, because the antibiotics will help target that cell and cause that cell to die. All right, and then endotoxin levels increase. That leads to symptoms including fever, chills, body aches, hypotension, which is not good if it gets too bad, low blood pressure, tachycardia, increased respiratory rate, inflammation. It can even be neurological and definitely abdominal. All right, and so in some cases, when you have a particular infection, the doctor might actually say, you might actually, after you start taking the antibiotics, you might feel a little cruddier, a little worse off. All right, and that's to be expected because this right here will be going on at high levels when those antibiotics get into your body and release the endotoxins. And your immune system is going to respond to the endotoxin. The endotoxin is going to have its natural effect. However, your body doesn't know that the endotoxin is garbage, all right, versus a live cell here. All right, now, endotoxin can cause septic shock, all right, where your body goes into shock and you don't get enough blood pressure, enough blood to all of your organs, and the organs fail. And in the United States, septic shock affects 1 million people per year, and it can actually lead to death in up to half of those cases, so it is a major issue. All right, exotoxins, all right, named based on the organism that makes it or the type of cell that it targets. So neurotoxins affect the nervous system. Enterotoxins target the GI tract. Hepatotoxins, the liver. Nephrotoxins, the kidneys. And currently there's over 200 exotoxins that have been described. And exotoxins are classified based on the type of action, their mode of action. And you've got a couple of paragraphs on each of these different types, but just showing the figure is sufficient for the lecture. But here you have the bacteria cell. It has flagella on it, all right, these nice tails that are going to propel it through an environment, and the exotoxins are secreted. All right, so this cell is still alive, and it is making these protein exotoxins and secreting them out into the environment. And so then they are able to target the host cell, and there's 3 different types. All right, here is the membrane-associated toxin, where there's a receptor that the toxin interacts with, and then there is a signal that is propagated inside the cell because of this transmembrane domain of that receptor, and then there is some sort of signal. All right, the toxin doesn't actually enter the cell, but the signal does, and then this cell is going to do something based on this signaling event. All right, then here, type 2. Toxins disrupt the host cell membrane. It forms pores. You see here there are pores there, or breaking down the lipid membrane and just annihilating it, kind of like a bomb being thrown at that lipid bilayer, a bomb being thrown at a wall, and the wall gets blown up. All right, that's kind of what the type 2 exotoxins do. And then type 3, all right, these are 2-part proteins. It's sometimes referred to as an AB protein, where there is the binding portion, the B part, of the toxin binds to the plasma membrane. This could be a receptor here. And then the toxin enters the cell by endocytosis, being brought in. And then once it's brought into the cell, then that toxin breaks apart into the different AB portions, and the A portion is actually what causes the effect on the host cell. All right, so examples here, you've got the type 1, membrane-acting extracellular toxins, type 2, membrane-damaging toxins, and type 3, intracellular toxins. All right, so what do you need to know? All right, you need to know the different types. All right, that one acts at the membrane but doesn't go into the cell. One type damages the membrane, and then one type actually gets into the cell and damages. All right, so examples here, go ahead and look through those. It's rather interesting. All right, diphtheria toxin, pertussis toxin, both of these are actually used for vaccines, all right, to protect a person from catching diphtheria or pertussis, whooping cough, and those are in the DPT vaccine. All right, also with that DPT, all right, the T there is for tetanus. All right, so tetanospasm, that is the official name of the tetanus toxin. All right, so if you get an infection with Clostridium tetani, it's not the infection that you should be worried about, but rather that neurotoxin being made and secreted by the Clostridium organism, and that causes contractile paralysis, all right, lockjaw. Your muscles lock up, and you end up not being able to breathe. All right, and that's where we'll stop for part 3. That part 3 is just talking about those endotoxins and exotoxins.